Quick wear, sweet pet, comeback, abdominal blackout, focus, facial recognition, short care, 2-way travel, clean body and mind, 1v1, cute, soft, cute, greedy little overlord Simu vs Meiqiang, tragic, black-bellied big boss, 3 views, giant, and annihilating rebel. Simu met He Jinchuan in the first world. He was locked up in the demon tower and was not human-like. He thought he was the great villain who destroyed the world, but later discovered that perhaps the world owed him endless imprisonment. Simu became his only light. Simu was originally from the cannon fodder camp, giving the protagonist a golden finger to fight against the sword all the way, and then being kicked away by the protagonist to repay the kindness. After she finally succeeded in her promotion, the space station had a new owner and underwent old reforms. Simu was thrown into the pedestrian department and everything started from scratch. The Department A of Passerby is the most difficult to promote, and they will be employees who fish in troubled waters for the rest of their lives. B. There's no way, who wants passersby to work less? How can they get promoted if they have nothing to do? C. But why was Sister Simu promoted to supervisor? Close the door, let go of the villains. Looking at the fierce protagonist camps in front of him, Simu didn't hesitate at all. The luckiest thing in my life is to meet you and then use all my strength to make you inseparable from me. Keywords of the novel. Passerby Jia, she has gone up again without a pop-up window. Passerby Jia, she has gone up again with a full download of the TXT series, and Passerby Jia, she has gone up again with the latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Close the door and release the villain. 1. This rabbit will bite people. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Close the door and release the villain. 1. This rabbit will bite people. Little fox, once you enter this constellation, you will live and die for generations to come. He Jinchuan. Underneath is the fiery red rock, surrounded by rolling heat waves. The thick iron chains of the bucket are intertwined, with a man wearing tattered clothes tied to them. This is the town demon pagoda of the world's top immortal sect, bound to the ultimate villain He Jinchuan of this world. In 3 years, He Jinchuan will break through the town demon pagoda, causing chaos in the entire cultivation world. This is when the plot of this plane officially begins. Simu was originally from the cannon fodder department of the protagonist, but recently the company changed its owner and she was thrown into the pedestrian department. Although the salary of the pedestrian department A is slightly lower, the task is easy. Simu tried hard to comfort herself, trying to forget about herself who was about to be promoted to supervisor in the cannon fodder department. The task of Simu in this world is very simple, it is to stay by the protagonist's side and watch him fly into immortality. However, after changing the department, Simu found out that the Passerby Department A, due to its simple business, did not even allocate a system. Unfortunately, Simu still has a problem, which is that he is a road enthusiast. Without a system, it means there is no navigation, so the protagonist did not find it and successfully found the villain. Simu thought that the villain and the protagonist would eventually come together, so she borrowed the villain to defect to the protagonist. Anyway, it was the same, so Simu set up a nest for herself in the demon tower, waiting for the villain to break through the seal. The seal of the demon tower is strong, and there is a barrier outside. The demon tower has a strong demonic aura inside, which is extremely detrimental to cultivators. Therefore, there is no dedicated guard in the demon tower, which makes it convenient for Simu to enter and exit. But those cultivators are not without any defense against the demon tower. As long as any seal inside the demon tower changes, they can detect it immediately and rush to the demon tower. Otherwise, how could the villain be locked up in the demon tower for over 1,000 years? In fact, the villain is quite pitiful. He was originally the son of the first immortal sect leader, but unfortunately, he was born with a demonic bloodline. At the age of 5, he was picked out of his tendons and smashed into the Dantian Pass, entering the demon tower. He suffered a lot of torture, and finally left the demon tower to give the male lead ahead. Simu thought sympathetically and smashed his mouth, happily nibbling on the fruit in his hand. The man on the iron chain suddenly opened his eyes at this moment, watching the red light flicker in the eyes of the white fox below. He swallowed his saliva and his hoarse and rough voice sounded in the air. "Little fox, can you give me a fruit?" The man had not spoken for over 1,000 years, and his voice was so unpleasant that it sounded like a fierce ghost's roar. He was so scared that Simu's fur exploded all over his body. The white fox launched a counterattack, holding fruit in her mouth and hiding the fruit balls under her. She looked up at the man's unrecognizable face, as if afraid that the other party would jump down and steal it. The man stared at the white fox for a while, his eyes flashing with disappointment, and then closed them again. "This white fox came here 3 days ago and settled down. He Jinchuan has been locked up here for over 1,000 years. It is the first time he has seen a living creature outside of a disciple of Lingyun sect, and he does not want to scare away the white fox." Seeing the villain close his eyes again, Simu breathed a sigh of relief. "How do you feel that the villain is a bit pitiful?" Unlike the cannon fodder around the male lead rushing to deliver warmth, the villain is disliked by everyone. Even if she pitied him, she wouldn't give him fruits to eat. It took her 3 hours to get these fruits back, they were precious. Although the demon tower is a bit rudimentary, Simu has never experienced any hardship when making cannon fodder for the male protagonist. As long as he doesn't worry about food and drink, he can get by. On the 10th day of gnawing on the fruit, Simu couldn't work hard anymore. Now that his tongue was completely numb, he wanted to change his taste. "Do whatever you say." The white fox covered the fruit in its nest with clean leaves to prevent it from being eaten by a certain villain, and then left the demon tower. As soon as the white fox left, He Jinchuan opened his eyes and looked down at the empty area below, secretly mobilizing his demonic energy to move. At the age of 5, he was imprisoned in the demon tower. His father killed his mother with his own hands, severed his tendons and meridians, and destroyed his elixir field. Over the years, he never slackened and relied on his innate demon meridians to repair his meridians and reshape his physical body, waiting for the opportunity to leave the demon tower. No one has ever taught He Jinchuan the method of cultivation. He Jinchuan explored it on his own, and after more than 1,000 years of continuous failure, he even reached the threshold of building a foundation. In fact, He Jinchuan is not just a demon meridian. He also has an immortal meridian in his body. He was originally practicing both immortality and demon cultivation, but the immortal meridian has been dug out by someone gritting his teeth hard. He Jinchuan suppressed the hatred in his eyes. If he can go out, he will retrieve those things one by one. The demon tower is located on the Qianshan mountain of Lingyun sect. Although there are no demons, the monsters on the mountain are extremely fierce due to the influence of the demon tower's demonic aura. Simu poked out a furry head from the grass and stared at the gray rabbit drinking water by the riverbank. A pair of fox eyes twirled slightly, and the next second he pounced fiercely at the rabbit by the river. This rabbit is her food for tonight. The rabbit had a keen sense of hearing and could detect the movement of the grass. Its long ears trembled, but it did not dodge. Instead, it turned around and bit the fox's face when the other person rushed forward. Simu, the whole fox is not doing well. His mother rabbits bite foxes. This is his mother unscientific. The intense pain on the cheeks covered the fox's eyes with mist, and Simu struggled frantically against the rabbit's blood-red eyes. Shit! This rabbit eats foxes. In a panic, the white fox kicked on the rabbit's face and successfully escaped the rabbit's mouth. After landing, Simu turned around and fled towards the forest. When she ran away, she instinctively turned back to look, only to see the rabbit chasing her from behind. Simu wanted to cry without tears. No one told her that this plain rabbit is so ferocious. Running back to the demon tower in one breath, I didn't expect the gray rabbit to also chase in. Squeak. The rabbit eats the fox. Her Simu is probably the most miserable passerby, there's no one left. She even said she wanted to make the protagonist sore, but now the plot hasn't started yet and she needs to take it easy. Shit. He Jinchuan listened to the familiar fox call and came to his senses from meditation. With his blood-stained eyes drooping, he saw a gray rabbit approaching the white fox step by step. The white fox's face was stained with blood and injured. Did you encounter a monster while picking wild fruits? The gray rabbit's three-petal lips moved and its hind feet slid, ready to attack again. Simu had no choice but to retreat, and in despair, he hid behind his nest, covering his face. He said, I have really lost face to the company. I am the first taskmaster in history to be killed by a rabbit. The gray rabbit jumped up, and at the same time, a red light hit the gray rabbit, throwing it several meters away. After the rabbit landed, it twitched twice and stopped breathing. Upon hearing the sound, Simu's fox ears trembled slightly. She lowered her front paws, which were covering her face, and looked at the fallen gray rabbit with joy. She quickly rushed forward. The white fox stopped beside the gray rabbit and tentatively extended its hind foot to kick it. Seeing that the gray rabbit did not react, it boldly approached and grinned. Lousy made you bite a fox, made you want to eat lousy. A rabbit doesn't have any rabbit-like appearance, has it been punished? That's it. Now it's your turn to make roasted whole rabbits. Simu picked up the rabbit and dragged the gray rabbit back to the edge of the nest, watching the furry rabbit start to struggle. How do we pull out the rabbit hair? Do you use your mouth? How do you peel off this skin? I really worry about people. He Jinchuan half squinted his eyes and looked at the white fox circling around the gray rabbit corpse below with great interest. Although it was a fox face covered in fox fur, he always felt that there were many vivid emotions on that face. Watching the fox bounce back and forth every day has now become He Jinchuan's only pleasure. Hope everyone can support us. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Close the door and release the villain, 2. The poor imprisoned villain. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Close the door and release the villain, 2. The poor imprisoned villain He Jinchuan hung in the air, leisurely watching the silly appearance of the fox below. After a moment, he controlled his demonic energy and snatched the body of the gray rabbit from the fox's hand. Without a person, everything is inconvenient. Simu finally scraped off a small handful of rabbit fur, and the whole rabbit suddenly flew away. She held her mouth full of rabbit fur and watched the rabbit floating in the air, jumping up from the ground. The rabbit happened to be only a finger wide from her, but could not be touched. Almost instantly, Simu's gaze locked onto the villain on the chain. Who else would grab her rabbit here besides the villain? Squeak. The white fox let out a threatening cry. In the eyes of He Jinchuan, it was just a small and infuriating thing, with no deterrent effect. The place where He Jinchuan is imprisoned is very large, with a building in the middle, only a 3-meter wide stone bridge leading to the building. Under the building and the stone bridge, there is rolling magma. Countless black iron chains stretched out from the platform and walls, binding He Jinchuan. Apart from his fingers and facial features, he had nowhere to move. The walls are covered with talisman paper. The villain is simply not human, even snatching the flesh of a fox. Simu stood at the edge of the stone bridge, eagerly watching the gray rabbit hovering on the red magma ahead. The black magic chi peeled off the rabbit's skin, hollowed out its internal organs, and the rabbit's skin and internal organs fell into the magma and burned into ashes. The remaining rabbit meat sank towards the magma, controlled at a distance of about 1 meter from the magma. The entire stone bridge was filled with meat fragrance. It smells so good, it's so greedy for foxes. I really want to eat it. The villain is very skilled at grilled meat, but after a dozen or so breaths, the rabbit meat on the magma was crispy, making the fox drool. The little paw of the white fox opened and closed, a bit eager to try. If it weren't for the lava waste fox ahead, she would have rushed forward and fought against the villain without caring. When she follows the protagonist, although she always blocks the sword and carries injuries, the protagonist never competes with their cannon fodder for food, and it is the cannon fodder that voluntarily surrenders. Not like a villain, stingy, selfish, unreasonable, no wonder he has no friends. The rabbit meat was roasted and sent to He Jinchuan by the demonic aura, tearing off a rabbit leg and delivering it to his mouth. The white fox widened its eyes, full of accusations and disbelief, wishing to scratch its paws on that bumpy face again. Sure enough, villains and the like are the most disliked. When she used to make cannon fodder, she was the one with the most knives inserted by the villains. Either by poisoning or by beating, poking, hitting, or chopping to death. It's like collecting all 101 ways to die. He Jinchuan took a bite of the rabbit meat and swallowed it. His internal organs were damaged, with constant internal injuries and external injuries. The rabbit meat slid down the esophagus like swallowing a knife, and he had already lost his sense of taste. After confirming that the meat was cooked, He Jinchuan chuckled and sent the rabbit to the side of the white fox, thinking to himself, "This white fox is really lively and tight." A faint scent of meat wrapped around her, and the white fox's nose twitched. With a flick of her eyes, she was pleasantly surprised to see the rabbit meat right above her head. With just a lift of her paws, she instinctively jumped up and hugged the rabbit meat with missing legs. After obtaining the rabbit meat, the white fox ran towards the small nest, turned its back to the villain, and began to nibble on it. I don't think the villain is that bad either. There are still 3 years left until the start of the plot. White Fox usually goes outside to pick up some wild fruits and deceives 2 demon beasts to come back and have the villains bake them for her to eat. Life is relatively peaceful. In such a flash, 4 or 5 months have passed, and the weather has already entered winter. On this day, the silent villain opened up for the first time. Xiaobai, to the north of Qianshan. Snow lotus flowers bloom every winter. These snow lotus flowers have rich spiritual energy and can help transform into demons. If you have time, you can go find them. The hoarse and rough voice seemed even more unpleasant than the first time, which frightened the white fox, who was huddled in its small nest. However, upon hearing it, it immediately transformed into a mental shock. 2 fox eyes rolled, and Simu excitedly ran out of the demon tower. Just as he left the demon tower, a cold wind almost blew on the silly fox. Thinking about transforming, Simu's heart rushed into the snow. It's no wonder she trusts the words of the villain too much. Over the past few days, the villain has never shown any malice, and instead even grilled her meat. Simu didn't feel that the villain's sudden statement was abrupt. In fact, if Simu was smart, how could he have worked in the cannon fodder department for so many years? Now, he has been transferred to Passerby. I heard that those particularly skilled employees are doing counterattack missions. The white fox had only left in a moment of incense, and a refreshing breeze swept through the demon tower. A person wearing white clothes, a blue jade crown on his head, a silver token hanging from his waist, and thin cloud patterns embroidered on his sleeves stepped on the wind. The person looked handsome and looked up at He Jinchuan, who was locked on the iron chain. He chuckled in disgust, and with a sweep of his sword finger, a white light flew through He Jinchuan's chest. He Jinchuan let out a muffled groan, devoid of any resistance, just staring gloomily at the white-clothed disciple. The life of the little animal is quite hard, the person said something out of nowhere, then flew forward and took out a porcelain bottle from his sleeve to take a drop of He Jinchuan's blood, disappearing into the air. He Jinchuan is used to it, closing his eyes and using magic energy to repair his chest injury after his white-clad disciple leaves. Although it has no significant effect, it can prevent him from dying due to excessive blood loss. Simu wandered around the North Mountain for a whole morning, not to mention the snow lotus flowers. In this extremely cold weather, he didn't even see any living creatures. Later, he didn't want to be frozen into a fox-eagle, so he reluctantly returned to the demon tower and planned to come and see it again tomorrow. A keen sense of smell is an instinct possessed by every demon cultivator. As soon as the white fox arrived at the entrance of the demon tower, she smelled a strong smell of blood and quickly ran back to the tower level where the villain was imprisoned. What caught the eye was the villain hanging on the iron rope like a chicken with its neck cut off, with blood continuously falling, as if it wouldn't be cooked until the blood was drained. Simu's heart trembled as she looked at He Jinchuan, who remained motionless with his eyes closed. A bad feeling surged in her heart. Isn't this villain just so cold? She just went out once, why did the villain become such a virtue when she came back? Fearing that the villain would really die, Simu ran to the platform and grabbed the mysterious iron chain, climbing up. The Xian iron chain is sturdy and difficult to break, and it will not actively attack demons like a spell. The white fox was agile and approached He Jinchuan in just a few strokes. This is the first time that Simu has looked at the villain so closely. Under the tattered cloth, his thin body is riddled with wounds, both old and new, and both are fatal injuries. His face had no skin, but it was not as bumpy as when he saw it from below. It was simply a scraped face, which was shocking to see. The wound on the chest pierced through, the size of a fist, and one could see the still beating heart through the flesh hole. Is this villain too miserable? Isn't the leader of Lingyun's sect a villainous father? Even if the villain is locked up in the demon tower, wouldn't it be so miserable? Thinking about the feeding that the villain has given her in the past few days, Simu looked at the poor villain and felt indignant in her heart. If she were the villain, she would also have destroyed the entire Lingyun sect. She deserved it. The white fox tail gently brushed against the young man's cheek. Why didn't the villain move a bit? The injury is so severe, isn't it about to die? If the villain dies, who will take her to find the protagonist and who will barbecue for her? The villain is so powerful that he won't die, will he? Simu is not very certain about self-comfort. After all, the big hole in her chest is not a joke. He Jinchuan allowed his demonic energy to self-circulate in his body, and the furry touch on his face forcibly pulled his chaotic consciousness back. He opened his eyes and looked at the little white fox, who was less than a finger away from him, in surprise. Suddenly facing the antagonist's pair of red eyes with a bloodthirsty intent, Simu was so scared that he stepped on the empty iron chain and slid down. It's over, I really want to turn into a roasted fox. The hostess's setting is: be a bit foolish, do whatever you want, and have negative emotional intelligence. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Close the door and release the villain. 3. Escape from the demon tower. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Close the door and release the villain. 3. Escape from the demon tower. Watching the white fox fall, He Jinchuan was startled and quickly used his magic energy to lift the little fox and put it back on the iron chain. Going down. It's dangerous up there. He struggled to squeeze a few words out of his teeth, like an old man about to die. Steadily holding onto the iron chain, Simu dared not be careless anymore. He looked at the villain who had more air than air, pondered, and then followed the iron chain back to Zhu Tai before leaving the demon tower. He Jinchuan didn't have much energy to care about the white fox, and his nerves were occupied by the pain in his chest. The injuries left by the people of Lingyun's sect on him are sharp and ruthless, but they always leave a glimmer of anger on him, making life more difficult than death. They knew that He Jinchuan would not be willing to die like this, nor could they directly kill him. The reason was not that He Jinchuan was the son of the sect leader, but that someone needed He Jinchuan to live and continuously provide blood. He Jinchuan has been imprisoned in the demon tower for over 1,000 years. Every year, the people of Lingyun's sect come to collect his blood, and at the same time, he is seriously injured. He is asked to spend another year healing his injuries and waiting for the next blood collection. The white fox returned shortly after leaving. When she returned, she was holding a few strange-looking grass in her mouth. She climbed up the iron rope and chewed them up, applying them to He Jinchuan's chest. He Jinchuan looked at the white fox in surprise, with a strange warmth in his heart. Since his birth, no one has cared about him, even the parents in his memory have never had one. Simu traveled through various worlds, even though it was her first time making cannon fodder, she knew about all worlds. She found some hemostatic herbs for the villain to control the injury first. Because he was worried about the harm of the villain, Simu kept lying on the iron rope beside him. At night, as expected by Simu, the villain launched a high fever, causing him to lose consciousness. Fortunately, the scorching magma below prevented the villain from getting cold. Simu hesitated for a moment, then leaned onto the villain's shoulder and lightly hooked his neck with a fox tail, hoping that he would feel better. As long as we stay through tonight and wait for the fever to subside, the villain will no longer be in danger of his life. Another familiar dream, perhaps not a dream, but a memory of the past. Every time Lingyun's sect takes blood, the severely injured He Jinchuan will fall into a nightmare of the past. In his dreams, it was his father's indifferent face and sharp sword, his mother's disgusted eyes and the long whip that fell on him, the malicious language and insults and punches of Lingyun's sect disciples. The next morning, the fever of the villain subsided, and Simu breathed a sigh of relief. 3 years passed by in a blink of an eye. For He Jinchuan, 3 years were insignificant, but just a painful moment in his life. For Simu, it was a bit long. But over the course of 3 years, Simu got along more and more harmoniously with the villains. From the beginning, he was wary of the villains, but now Simu really regards them as friends. On this day, Simu was lying on the iron chain, gnawing on the villain's roasted wild chicken. Everything was as usual, but suddenly the entire town demon tower shook. Baihu was momentarily stunned, feeling a bit flustered and puzzled, before realizing that the plot had begun. The plot of this world begins with the Lingyun sect's acceptance ceremony, where the demon tower collapses and the demon king emerges. The current protagonist is in this apprenticeship ceremony. The stone pagoda shook, the eaves peeled off, the stone bridge broke, the building platform sank, and the red rock splashed several meters high. The talismans on the stone walls turned into ashes one by one. He Jinchuan felt most of the physical constraints disappear, and he forcefully broke the mysterious iron chain, holding the white fox in his arms. The splashing magma fell on the black iron chain, instantly corroding it. Some fell on He Jinchuan, emitting a burnt smell of flesh and skin. He Jinchuan was completely indifferent to the pain on his body, he only knew that this was a great opportunity for him to escape from the demon tower. The root of the dark iron chain broke, and the demonic energy in He Jinchuan's body surged all the way. To his surprise, he jumped from building the foundation, opened the light, fused, and moved to reach the golden elixir cultivation stage. The surging demonic energy constantly repaired He Jinchuan's dark wounds, even the skinned face grew new flesh. The town demon tower is a stone tower that stands hundreds of feet tall. Inside the tower, there are more than 3,000 evil spirits trapped. At this time, the seal of the town demon tower is loose, and it is about to collapse. Various demons are fleeing and trying their best to leave the seal. He Jinchuan came out of the demon tower with a white fox in his hand, hiding by the grass under the tower and watching the cracked stone tower with a mix of demonic energy. His eyes were red like flames, but he was suppressed by him to the death. For over 1,000 years, he finally escaped from this damn place. Quickly, more than 10 white-clothed people from Lingyun's sect appeared at the bottom of the tower, their hands quickly imprinted to suppress the restless demons inside the demon tower. He Jinchuan withdrew his gaze and headed towards the foot of Qianshan. Simu felt the sound of the wind around him and poked his head out of the villain's arms, looking out at the retreating vegetation around him, which inevitably made him nervous. She tilted her head and was surprised to find that the villain had regained his appearance. A pair of affectionate Danfang eyes were raised perfectly, but they didn't seem frivolous. Instead, they were sharp, with a high nose bridge, sharp sword eyebrows, a face as sharp as a knife, and tightly pursed thin lips, making it difficult to approach. The most eye-catching thing is the crimson eyes, which seemed to burn a terrifying inferno fire deep inside. Simu knew that it was the hatred and unwillingness of the villain. He Jinchuan was very familiar with Lingyun's sect and successfully avoided the disciples who were patrolling. He then turned around and arrived at Huangmei Peak, where the outer disciples were located. After arriving at Huangmei Peak, He Jinchuan stopped running and began searching around. Finally, he found a lonely outer disciple by the creek. He Jinchuan's figure was like a ghost, easily twisting the neck of the outer disciple and sucking him dry. Under the demonic aura, the outer disciple turned into dust and blew away in the breeze. He transformed into the appearance of the outer disciple, holding the white fox in his arms and leaving the creek in a grand manner. Lingyun Peak. The main hall. A dozen or so white-clothed people supported each other with pale faces. The elder held on to his weak chest, which was slightly painful, and said, "Master, the demon tower has been destroyed. The demon king has escaped, and we have executed the demons who did not escape on the spot." The protagonist is a young man in his early 20s, ignoring his overwhelming aura and being no different from a scholar. The leader of Lingyun's sect furrowed his brows lightly, but it was not the demon king who asked, "Where is Jinchuan?" Several elders looked at each other in confusion. Finally, a female elder took a step forward and presented a piece of tattered cloth in her hand, saying, "We found it on a broken stone bridge. Young master, I'm afraid he has already encountered something unexpected. Although He Jinchuan is a demon clan and has been imprisoned in the demon tower for many years, several elders can feel that the leader still cares about He Jinchuan as he is the son of the Lingyun sect leader." Looking at the grey cloth strip that Lingyun sect leader did not answer, he lowered his eyes and said, "I will immediately notify all major parties about today's matter. Additionally, regarding the destruction of the demon tower, I must investigate the mastermind behind it." "Yes. Will comply." Huangmei Peak. Clear breeze and white clouds, green trees and idle flowers. He Jinchuan has forgotten how long he hasn't seen such a scenery before. He stood under the big tree, stepping on the grass, with a gentle breeze blowing in his ears and the treetops rustling. Despite wearing an ordinary face, there is a sense of loneliness and independence. Just as he was lost in thought, an urgent voice came. "Junior brother, senior brother summoned us. There has been a big event in the sect today, and senior brother wants us to strengthen our patrols." Upon hearing the sound, He Jinchuan withdrew his gaze and turned skillfully to salute the disciple, saying, "It's senior brother, I'm going right away." End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Close the door and release the villain. 4. Open the trial conference. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Close the door and release the villain. 4. Open the trial conference. The collapse of the demon tower caused the Lingyun sect's apprenticeship ceremony to be interrupted midway. Young people from all walks of life who came to participate in the ceremony were temporarily arranged to enter the Huangmei Peak where the disciples of the outer gate were located. The apprenticeship ceremony will resume next year's trial meeting. The demon king escaped, the demon tower was destroyed, and Lingyun sect strengthened its defense, but since then everything has been peaceful. Half a year has passed in a blink of an eye, and He Jinchuan has been staying at Huangmeifeng as a disciple of another sect, Li Xian. That night, the moon was bright and the stars were sparse, and the breeze was gentle, just like in the past. However, He Jinchuan rarely meditated and practiced. Instead, he strolled leisurely by the stream at Huangmei Peak with his white fox. The moonlight shone brightly on the earth, revealing a hint of laziness. The gentle breeze blew and the water surface of the stream shimmered, as if it had been sprinkled with glitter. Simu-san jumped and followed He Jinchuan, lifting his paws to pounce on the night butterfly. Night butterflies are a type of butterfly that emits light, with colorful spots resembling little elves in the jungle. They are the most common spiritual insects in the cultivation world and prefer to live in places with rich spiritual energy. After more than 3 years of feeding by the villain, the white fox has noticeably gained a lot of weight, and even has a faintly visible double chin. With a splash, splashes of water splashed around, wetting the hem of He Jinchuan's clothes. Without warning, Simu choked on a few mouthfuls of water, but instinctively wanted to speak, only to let more liquid rush into his internal organs. Goo 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 goo. He Jinchuan looked at the white fox that had fallen into the stream in surprise, staring at the bubbles bulging on the water surface, unable to laugh or cry. When this little thing grows flesh, it must have forgotten its brain. It can walk well and still fall into the water. Helplessly squatting on the shore, He Jinchuan reached out and poked into the water. Just as he pinched the neck of the white fox and lifted her head out of the water, He Jinchuan pressed it back. Simu. The villain. Not a human. Who the hell saved the person and just pulled it out and then pushed it back? So much so that when Simu was breathing in fresh air with his mouth open, he suddenly got a few more sips of water. You're done, stinky villain. I want to sever ties with you, the kind that can't be coaxed. With a smile on his face, He Jinchuan jumped into the water and lay down at the bottom, taking advantage of the situation, feeding the white fox a closed-breath pill. The suppressed feeling in the chest suddenly dissipated, and the white fox opened its mouth and screamed wildly. Goo 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 goo. Watching bubbles spit out from the white fox's mouth, He Jinchuan covered the fox's mouth with one hand and hugged its restless body with the other. Simu was also not polite to the villain, biting into their palm with his mouth open. The sudden stabbing pain startled He Jinchuan and he gritted his teeth without making a sound. On the shore, a sudden gust of wind swayed the branches. Then a voice rang out. Please let me go, I won't say anything and haven't seen anything. Senior, I was wrong, I was wrong. I don't want to die, as long as you let me go, you can be a cow or a horse. I only believe in dead people who can't speak, another rough and sharp voice sounded, clearly speaking between my throat. Then, with a muffled groan, the shore fell into silence. This is completely a sterilization scene. Simu raised her fox ears and listened to the movements on the shore, releasing her hand that was biting He Jinchuan. That's it, if she gets caught with the villain, she will also be silenced, right? The white fox was stiff all over and dared not even breathe. After a long time, there was no further movement on the shore, even the wind remained still. He Jinchuan stayed vigilantly for half a pillar of incense underwater before climbing onto the shore, using his magic to dry the white fox and the water on his body. He walked towards the corpse placed in the distance. The body was dressed in the outer disciple clothing of Lingyun sect, belonging to Huang Meifeng. The body was drained of essence and turned into a dried corpse. He Jinchuan just stood a meter away and looked coldly, without any intention of getting close. Without the blood pressure in his heart, the immortal meridian would become violent, leaving it in some people's bodies no different from the demon meridian. He wanted to see how the immortal lord, who was praised by everyone for his beautiful scenery, would behave if he tore off his hypocritical mask and displayed his ugliness in front of the world. Simu squatted next to the corpse, reached out his front paw and pushed the dried corpse back quickly. His snow-white eyebrows curled up, and a hint of seriousness could be seen from the fox face. She tilted her head, rolled her eyes, waved her paw, pulled off the Qianquan bag from the waist of the corpse, grabbed it tightly, turned around and jumped into the villain's arms, then held the Qianquan bag as if offering a treasure and handed it to the villain. He Jinchuan lowered his head and looked at the little fox. He took the Qianquan bag and threw it back to the body, explaining to the accusing gaze of the little fox, the murderer has a deep suspicion. This dead thing cannot be moved. If it is taken away and discovered, perhaps I will be the next one. Squeak, squeak. The killer has already left, you wouldn't know. Simu is not willing to accept it. She just saw that the Qianquan bag is bulging and there must be many treasures. His palm brushed over the back of the white fox, and He Jinchuan withdrew his gaze from the corpse, hugging the restless white fox and turning away. Return to the quiet bamboo house and light the candle wax. He Jinchuan set up a barrier and returned to the bed to meditate and practice. A circle of white light surrounded He Jinchuan, no different from spiritual energy. However, Simu understood that this white light was not any spiritual energy, but rather a demonic energy in the villain's body. It was just to prevent being detected by others, and the villain used a layer of spiritual light to wrap around the demonic energy as a cover. Even if someone sees it, no one will ever notice. Nevertheless, the villains are very vigilant, always setting up barriers during cultivation, and will not easily take action in front of others. The demonic aura on the villain's body can make Simu feel suppressed and uncomfortable. Usually, when the villain meditates, she pitifully lies under the bed, eagerly looking at the soft wooden bed. Simu who sleeps on the floor every night. Another day he wants to sleep in a big bed. Alas, garbage villains are inhuman. The next morning. The news of the tragic death of an outer disciple by the stream quickly spread throughout Huangmei Peak, but it did not attract the attention of the inner sect. A mere outer disciple is not worth alarming the inner sect. The disciple who discovered the body was called away by the leader of Huangmei Peak early on, but he never returned afterwards. Simu remembers that the disciple who was called away had a chinkuan bag hanging from his waist, but now he still has lingering fear. If it were really taken away by the villain that night, would it be the villain who disappeared? The tragic death of the outer disciple did not stir up waves, and even the disappearing disciple, except for He Jinchuan and Simu, was not noticed by anyone. Everything of Lingyun's sect has returned to tranquility. In the blink of an eye, the trial meeting of Lingyun's sect arrived. The trial conference is held every 5 years, and all external disciples can participate. After the competition, the top 500 disciples can enter the inner sect. Due to an accident during last year's apprenticeship ceremony, this trial meeting will not only accept disciples from the inner sect, but also senior disciples to select true disciples. Therefore, there was intense competition at that time, and even many inner sect disciples participated in it. He Jinchuan stood among the many disciples, holding the passage token for the secret realm trial with a dark expression in his eyes. Putting the pass order into his chest, he raised his white fox and looked at himself. Xiao Bai, come into the secret realm and follow me closely. Don't run around, okay? Simu licked her paws and raised her chin proudly, saying, oh, I know now. You just need to keep an eye on me. Standing quietly in the sea of people, waiting until the elder of Lingyun's sect appeared, opened the entrance to the trial's secret realm, and a white light swept past. In the blink of an eye, he took away the disciples outside the secret realm. The old man who opened the secret realm smiled and touched his beard. There were several disciples who performed well in the last apprenticeship ceremony. This time, we need to keep an eye on them to avoid being preempted by others. With nothing in his mind, when he regained his senses, He Jinchuan found himself appearing in a dense forest. Looking down, fortunately, the white fox is still in its arms. He Jinchuan exhaled a mouthful of turbid air and walked towards the depths of the forest. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Close the door and release the villain. 5. The villain's ultimate weapon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Close the door and release the villain. 5. The villain's ultimate weapon, Part 1. This is an exceptionally dense forest, with almost no visible sunlight around it. The clouds in the sky are gray, like before heavy rain arrives. There is a strange layer of blue-green-purple grass growing on the ground, and the stems of the grass resemble slowly beating veins inside the human body. This place is far from the immortal secret realm, and no one would doubt that it is the demon clan's secret realm. Simuo was a bit scared in He Jinchuan's arms. Most of the plot she knew was related to the protagonist, while the antagonist could only have a slight understanding of the plot from the protagonist's side. The further you move forward, the more oppressive the atmosphere becomes, and the sky becomes even more gloomy. He Jinchuan was also a bit surprised at the moment, wondering why there was such a place in the fairy realm. There was a demonic aura pervading all sides, and the things growing around him were undoubtedly demonic plants. However, the secret realm has always been unpredictable, and although He Jinchuan had some doubts in his heart, he did not reveal them. He continued forward along the barely visible path beneath his feet. This forest seemed to have no end, walking all the way until it was dark and above the moon. He Jinchuan had to find a relatively open spot to settle down. Using the dry branches around him to raise the campfire, He Jinchuan sat on the stones by the fire, took out the prepared dry food from the ring space, and threw the dried spirit beast meat to the white fox, while he slowly nibbled on a large cake. Simu squatted at He Jinchuan's feet, with his back against He Jinchuan's calves. His two front paws held the dried meat as big as a fox's head in his arms, leisurely nibbling on it, occasionally looking up around. The surroundings were pitch black, with no stars but a red moon. The silence was even more terrifying, with no sound of insects chirping. After eating and drinking enough, the white fox crawled back into He Jinchuan's arms, closed its eyes and fell asleep. She dared not stay on the side alone. If something came out and took it away, where would it cry? Simu didn't forget that rabbits in this world can bite people. In this way of going back and forth, He Jinchuan gained nothing in this forest and did not leave. However, on the fourth day, he met someone else. The other party consists of 5 people, 4 men and 1 woman, of which 2 male disciples are still from the inner sect. Isolate far away and you can hear their voices. When can we get out of this dilapidated forest? Are we lost? This was the voice of the female disciple, with a hint of coquettishness in her speech. Senior brother, we won't get lost, will we? It's been 4 days and we haven't even seen a single spiritual herb in this broken forest. Why bother? It's only the 4th day after 3 months of trial. He Jinchuan only glanced at the 5 people from a distance. He was about to turn around and bypass these people when he was caught by the leading inner disciple among them. Hey! Stop and talk about you. Come here. He Jinchuan couldn't resist the scolding from behind, so he had to retract his feet and turn towards the 5 people. The leader was a chubby man with a big arm and a round waist, covered in fat and piled up with grooves. He held a delicate-looking female disciple from an outer sect in his arms. His gaze was fixed on He Jinchuan, looking up and down. He saw that He Jinchuan was dressed in the attire of an outer disciple, and his eyes were full of disdain. Suddenly, his gaze stopped at the white fox in He Jinchuan's arms, revealing an undisguised arrogance and greed. Give me this spirit beast, and I won't argue with you about my disrespect just now. This is just an ordinary fox, He Jinchuan said coldly. Even ordinary me. The chubby man raised his chin and signaled to an outsider beside him. The outer disciple immediately raised his eyebrows and smiled, and walked aggressively to He Jinchuan. He roughly grabbed the back of the white fox's neck and offered it to the fat man. Senior brother, you're white fox. The chubby man withdrew his gaze of charity from He Jinchuan, released the female disciple in his arms, and he put his hands on a seal before forcibly signing a master-servant contract with the white fox. Simu only felt a pain in her brain and a nauseating force rushed into her body. She began to struggle violently, turning her head and biting the back of her disciple's hand. The outer disciple let out a painful cry and released the white fox. After landing, the white fox curled up in pain on the ground, convulsing all over. After the contract between the master and servant was stable, the fat man put down his hand to tie the seal. He didn't even glance at the white fox lying on the ground, and took the female disciple back into his arms, leading everyone forward. He Jinchuan's chin was taut, his thin lips pursed into a straight line. He approached carefully and picked up the trembling white fox from the ground, with red light flashing deep in his pitch-black eyes. If it weren't for those people outside the secret realm monitoring the trial meeting, he would not hesitate to kill them. The pain on her body slightly eased, and a surge of grievances and dissatisfaction surged into her boss Mu's brain. She reached out her paw and vigorously scratched the back of He Jinchuan's hand, looking at the bloodstains that were not enough to vent her frustration. She opened her mouth and bit down with two small sharp teeth. The villain didn't even help her. Aren't they friends now? She was bullied, and the villain actually watched her being bullied. She wants to cut ties with the villain, and once she leaves the secret realm, she will go find the protagonist. Alright, it's okay. He Jinchuan gently stroked her back with another hand that was not bitten by a fox. Ji. The white fox let out a threatening roar. It's okay, you're done. I want the protagonist to kill you sooner. Hey, can you hurry up with your senior brother's spiritual pet? Do we still have to wait for you? Urged the person in front. Here we go. A hint of malice flashed in He Jinchuan's eyes as he quickened his pace. After dark, a few people walked up to a cliff. The cool breeze at night blew, staring at the blood moon above his head, and the leading fat man stopped in his tracks. He turned around and waved his hand, pinching the buttocks of the female disciple in his arms. We'll rest here tonight and continue our journey tomorrow, he said. Yes, senior brother. The others heard the instructions and searched around for a place to stay tonight. He Jinchuan sat cross-legged under the trunk of a tree slightly away from them, and this perspective could catch the attention of others. Thinking about the dominance of these people, He Jinchuan deliberately raised his left hand when he took out the spiritual beast meat from the mustard space and fed it to the little fox, just enough to block the sight of those people falling on the little fox. He still gnawed on the rough cake himself. The fat man ate a few spiritual fruits and lingered in the clothes of the female disciple for a while. He was planning to take the female disciple to a nearby forest for a field battle, but suddenly remembered the spirit fox during the day. He stood up with his female disciple in his arms and walked towards He Jinchuan. When He Jinchuan stood up on the opposite side, he noticed something was wrong and immediately put the spirit beast meat back into the mustard space. The white fox was eating deliciously, almost biting its tongue. It lifted its paw and looked at it for a moment, then went to grab He Jinchuan's hands in confusion. She. Where is her flesh? Turning his back to the red moon, the fat man's plump body cast a shadow and said, Kid, I haven't had meat for a long time. Go and pick up this fox for me, bake it and bring it over. Simu was busy searching for the missing spiritual beast flesh on the villain's body when suddenly he heard such a sentence and was so scared that he pressed tightly against the villain's chest and dared not move. The villain wouldn't really want to skin and roast her, would he? Squeezing. Fox meat is sour, smelly, and not delicious. He Jinchuan lowered his head and glanced at the panicked white fox in his arms. He looked up at the fat man and said, Senior brother, I can't do this. What are you saying? You dare to disobey me? Believe it or not, I'll kill you now. The chubby man said with a spiritual energy, rubbing against He Jinchuan's cheek and making a fierce cut on He Jinchuan's face. Feeling the blood sliding down his cheeks, He Jinchuan hugged the little fox tightly and said, You cannot harm the little fox. I don't know what to do. Kill him. The fat man's face trembled as he stepped back. This guy hasn't disobeyed his words for the first time. If he doesn't listen, then go to hell. The fat man finished speaking, and the other three male disciples gathered around, beating He Jinchuan to the death. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Close the door and release the villain. 6. The villain's ultimate weapon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Close the door and release the villain. 6. The villain's ultimate weapon, middle, the combination of punches and kicks that pounced on his head and face. He Jinchuan didn't react for a moment. He knelt down on the ground with a bump in his hind foot, and the little fox in his arms rolled down, being forcefully stomped on by the ill-intentioned disciples. The white fox let out a scream, and He Jinchuan quickly climbed forward 2 steps, moving the disciple's foot to protect the white fox in his arms. Fists, kicks, and kicks landed on the villain, all with a strong muffled sound. The three disciples exerted their full strength, and the villain curled up on the ground silently enduring it. Simu peeked out an eye from the arms of the villain, looking at the fierce disciples with a burning heart. She has also seen many protagonists being beaten, but every time someone stands up to support them, and according to the luck of the villain, they are at most beaten to death. He Jinchuan felt the moisture on his wrist and saw that it was a little fox licking his wrist. Facing the worried gaze of the little fox, he opened his mouth and silently said two words. "Don't be afraid." Subsequently, He Jinchuan's expression trembled and he quietly infiltrated his demonic energy into the ground, hoping to silently kill these Lingyun sect disciples. No one noticed the deepening of the brown soil color, silently pushing towards the feet of those disciples, like the thick and thin hair of the demonic aura hooked onto the boots of Lingyun sect disciples, invading the fabric. The chubby disciple looked at He Jinchuan's disciple uniform, which was full of footprints and almost indistinguishable. Excited, the hand hidden under the female disciple's robe increased its strength, causing the female disciple to be coquettish. He Jinchuan's face turned pale, with blood oozing from the corners of his mouth, and he looked like a powerful crossbow. The white fox in his arms was so anxious that he kicked his legs, trying to break free from the villain. Although this is a villain, Simu doesn't want the villain to die like this, let alone the villain is not bad now. Bang! Suddenly, a loud noise caused everyone to stop and turn their heads to look in the direction of the noise. I saw the cliff behind me explode out of thin air, with gravel falling all over the ground. Between the cracked cracks, something was enveloped in a red halo, which looked extremely unknown. "We've met the baby!" someone exclaimed excitedly. At this moment, the 5 disciples had no intention of beating He Jinchuan, and they involuntarily approached the red light. The fat man withdrew his hand from the female disciple and stopped at the edge of the cliff. He looked up at the indistinct treasure in the red light and raised his eyebrows, then said to another external disciple, "Go, take it down for me." The baby is at a height of 3 or 4 meters on the cliff, and the outer disciples have not yet learned how to fly with swords, so they can only let the inner disciples ride. Being summoned by Fatty as a servant, those who were also disciples of the inner sect were reluctant. However, Fatty had the highest cultivation here and had some influence in his family. This disciple reluctantly took off his sword from his waist and approached towards the red light. After getting close to the red light, it was only then that I could see clearly that there were 2 crescent-shaped swords below. They were all blood red, shining brightly, with suppressed runes engraved on the edges, unlike the righteous ones. But this is the fairy realm, and everything in the fairy realm is naturally related to spiritual cultivation. The disciple was only slightly puzzled and reached out his hand towards the crescent moon blade in the red light. The crimson light shone like blood on the hands of the inner disciples, and a wave of warmth spread through their fingertips. However, with a single breath, the originally warm red light burned like carbon fire covering the entire hand. The inner disciple let out a scream as he fell from the cliff. Several people around him were startled and rushed forward to check. They saw that the outer disciple's right hand was burnt black, with only dark bones left on his hand. The air instantly fell silent, and no one dared to look at the fat man's face, afraid of becoming the next person to retrieve the treasure. The chubby man frowned, his fat on his face squeezed, and his green bean eyes were nowhere to be found. He snorted lightly and spoke to He Jinchuan, who was lying on the ground. "Hey, that one on the ground, it's you. Take off the things on top for me." That demeanor is full of the recklessness and irrationality of a wealthy young master. He Jinchuan froze and didn't dare to refute. He let go of the white fox in his arms and struggled to get up from the ground, stumbling towards the cliff. Simu looked at He Jinchuan's obedient appearance and followed him, biting into his hem. "People will die. Didn't you see that even the inner disciples couldn't get it? Did the early antagonists hold back so much? At least resist, the protagonist still knows how to resist." The pulling force at the hem made He Jinchuan's movements pause. He bent down and gently touched the head of the white fox, saying, "Be good, it's okay." He wiped away the contract mark on the white fox's body and continued forward. The fat man was all focused on wanting that treasure and didn't even notice the sudden discomfort. The little fox is about to die of anger. Where is his backbone? Is the villain so spineless? He Jinchuan walked to the bottom of the cliff and glanced up. He gritted his tongue and slowly climbed up the protruding rocks. These people, let's find a solution when we go out. He has actually reached the golden elixir stage of cultivation, but he is not afraid of losing his life because of the treasure above. Squeak, squeak. The white fox watched as the villain who had been sent to death spun frantically under the cliff. It wanted to climb up with it, but in less than 2 steps, it fell off the stone wall. The fat man wrapped his hands around his chest and looked extremely disdainful towards this person and fox. The cultivation world has always respected the strong, even the first immortal sect like Lingyun sect is no exception. However, the strong of the demon clan always come and go, while the strong of the cultivation world is always wrapped in a sugar coating. He Jinchuan only realized something was wrong when he crawled under the red light. The crescent moon sword under the light was not a spiritual weapon, and its level was not low. Unfortunately, there was no way out. If he went down, he was afraid that those Lingyun sect disciples would immediately kill him and the little fox. It's easy to deal with these small shrimp and fish, but if it catches the attention of Lingyun sect, he will definitely be locked up in the demon tower again. The little fox is a demon and cannot avoid cramping and peeling skin. He Jinchuan is not afraid of death, nor does he want to return to the demon tower, nor does he want little white fox to have an accident because of himself. Anyway, when he dies, that person won't receive his blood, and sooner or later he will show his horse feet. He actually has nothing to be unwilling to accept. Feeling certain in his heart, he lowered his gaze and reached out his hand towards the red light. Simu wished she could jump onto the cliff and kill the villain, when suddenly a familiar voice rang out in her mind. Little fox, run away. It's communication skills. The white fox felt an unprecedented panic. Not only did it not escape, but it bounced and jumped against the cliff, squeaking non-stop, and the whole fox appeared very irritable. Senior brother, what has stimulated this fox? The female disciple glanced at the crazy white fox and took the initiative to lean into the fat man's arms. Whatever it does, it's just a little beast. Blood dripped down the arms, some falling onto the fur of the white fox below. He Jinchuan could clearly feel the domineering power melting his flesh, which was a more painful punishment than Ling Qi. The nail covers peeled off from his hands, and the meridians beneath his flesh shrank in the scorching heat. The uncontrollable pain occasionally emanates from the villain's mouth. Simu's eyes had already turned red. She didn't understand why the villain, who had done nothing wrong, suffered such unfair treatment. At least during the 4 years she spent with the villains, they never took the initiative to harm anyone. It's really unfair to have to be cannon fodder for the protagonist even though it's so tragic in the future. Unfortunately, she is just a little fox that has never been transformed, and she knows nothing except for activating her spiritual intelligence. Ah! He Jinchuan suddenly let out a low growl, his heart wandering as he grasped the crescent moon blade in the red light. As soon as he grabbed the blade, his body's strength was instantly drained by the crescent moon blade, and he fell straight from the cliff. After landing, He Jinchuan's consciousness had become somewhat blurred, lying on the ground unable to move, just staring blankly at the direction of the white fox. At the last moment, He Jinchuan mobilized all his magic energy to protect his heart meridian and did not die on the spot, but all the magic energy in his body had been sucked away by that magical tool, leaving no trace of his cultivation. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Close the door and release the villain. 7. The villain's ultimate weapon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Close the door and release the villain. 7. The villain's ultimate weapon, Part 2, the baby has it. He has it. A thief-eyed outer disciple's eyes lit up as he was about to step forward when he was pushed away by the fat man who pushed away the female disciple. The chubby man strode swiftly, grabbing the crescent moon knife in He Jinchuan's hand and flipping it over carefully. After the crescent moon blade detached from the red light, the eerie color tone that shone brightly on it also disappeared. At this moment, it looked like a piece of scrap metal with a flurry of gray. Despite its unremarkable appearance, the disciples of Lingyun's sect still do not underestimate the appearance of the moon-bending blade. After all, if it were not a treasure, how could it appear so eerie? Even if it is not a heavenly and earthly treasure, it must be a magical tool, right? Squeaking. The white fox gently crouched in front of He Jinchuan, with a pair of eyes misted with water. He Jinchuan was covered in injuries, blood was constantly flowing out, his eyes were lifeless and his consciousness was chaotic, giving people an illusion of not closing their eyes in death. The fox's tail caressed the bloodshot face, and Simu leaned forward. The little fox's tongue licked the villain's cheek, hoping to awaken his mind, but to no avail. After studying with the crescent moon knife for a long time, the fat man used his spiritual energy and decided to contract this thing first. The spiritual energy slowly covered the crescent moon blade until it enveloped its entire body. The chubby man controlled the spiritual energy to immerse it into the blade, making it smooth and unobstructed, as if it were an ordinary iron tool. He furrowed his eyebrows in confusion, and the crescent moon knife responded to him. The blade trembled, with a gentle and comfortable force that wrapped around the fat man's spiritual power. The excited expression on the chubby man's face slowly relaxed, leaving him completely empty. He felt a trend of breakthrough in his cultivation and thought to himself, it's really a treasure. Just as he completely let go of himself, the force suddenly became extremely domineering, quickly tearing apart the surrounding spiritual energy and rushing back into the fat man's internal organs, instantly shattering his divine soul, without even a scream. The other disciples only saw the fat man's body begin to withdraw without warning, his 7 orifices bleeding, and his limbs twisted strangely, causing them to retreat one after another. I saw the originally gray crescent knife slowly turning into a bright red along the edge of the blade. Some strange runes on it lit up, and a suppressed breath enveloped the crescent knife. If you still cannot recognize this as demonic energy, there is no need for the eyes of several disciples to exist. This is a magic weapon. It's a magic weapon. How could there be a magic weapon in the fairy realm? The female disciple screamed out. Run quickly. What are you still waiting for? The only surviving inner disciple shouted. This pair of crescent knives will also actively consume the cultivator's divine soul, indicating that they are at least intermediate-level magical weapons. A few disciples had just raised the idea of running when they realized that their bodies were unable to move. The strong demonic aura leaked from the crescent knife wrapped around their ankles, and it was obvious that the magic weapon treated them as prey. What should I do? I don't want to die. The demonic aura penetrated into the skin from the ankle with a slight piercing pain, which amplified the fear in the female disciple's heart. Why aren't the other few people like this? Someone touched the teleportation symbol and wanted to give up the competition. Crush the talisman, but after a few breaths, the person is still in place. The teleportation symbol has expired. Fear was amplified again, and at this moment, the demonic energy had slowly entered their muscles and veins. The fine and dense pain amplified their senses, and several disciples began to scream in pain. Upon hearing the screams, Simu looked up at the crescent moon blade floating in mid-air and thought of a description of the plain plot. He held the crescent moon sword in his hand, with a body full of blood red, like the crimson crescent moon on the horizon. The blade was covered in runes, and this was the magical weapon that the demon lord had successfully refined with the essence and blood of 1001 Yuaning cultivators. The crescent moon. The crescent moon can open up the sky, carve out the earth, and is incredibly domineering. This. Isn't this the ultimate weapon of the villain's future? Why is it here? What about the essence and blood refined by 1001 yuan cultivators? The white fox instinctively shrank into He Jinchuan's arms. That is the weapon that will be used by future villains to kill all directions, a magical weapon that can cleave the cultivators of the gods with just one strike. It's terrifying to see it here now. A few chi cultivators were not enough to fill the gaps between the teeth of the crescent moon. After a few were turned into ashes, the momentum on the crescent moon blade did not diminish at all, and 100-mile radius of demonic energy billowed in this area. Fortunately, the waning moon only subconsciously attacks cultivators, as their spiritual energy surges in their bodies. The crescent moon floated in mid-air for a moment, and then He Jinchuan, whose consciousness was blurred, was lifted up by the demonic aura. The surrounding demonic aura surged into He Jinchuan's body like a vicious dog smelling a fishy smell. He Jinchuan's face had already returned to its original appearance, and just now those cultivators were attracted by the waning moon and had no time to pay attention to him. The young man's handsome face was a bit agonizing, with his eyebrows locked tightly and his lips bitten open, still unable to suppress his low growl. The domineering demonic energy quickly repaired the broken tendons and broken internal organs of He Jinchuan, and then quickly destroyed them. Continuously reshaping and destroying. The waning moon needs a strong enough body to welcome its existence, and at this moment it is helping the only demon clan refine its body here. Although its cultivation is not high, the other party has a demon vein and can barely withstand its existence. White Fox looked up at the top, her eyes full of confusion. The experience and situation of the villain were completely different from what she saw in the plot, but it seemed to roughly match. I don't know how many times it was tortured repeatedly, but the light of the waning moon slowly faded away. It turned back into that pair of gray and black scrap iron, and did not enter He Jinchuan's body. Together with He Jinchuan, they lost weight and fell to the ground. Everything suddenly came to an end like this. Simu stood up and watched for a few minutes before kicking his legs and running towards He Jinchuan. He Jinchuan remained in a coma, but the injuries on his body disappeared and he breathed steadily, as if he had fallen asleep. Staring at the handsome face of the villain for a while, Simu finally ran to the side of the crescent knives, reached out his paw and tentatively scratched them, without any response. It was hard to imagine that this was a magical weapon that had just killed someone. The waning moon remained motionless, so Simu dared to step on it and carefully observe. Although the waning moon has become plain and unadorned, it is still very exquisite, like a craft. Simu thought to herself, is it only after the villain kills 1001 yuaning cultivators that the remaining moon will become its original appearance? He Jinchuan woke up at noon the next day and opened his eyes to see the blue sky and white clouds. He was no longer in that eerie forest. After Canue recognized the master, the demon forest disappeared. That area was the demon realm, which Canue deliberately seduced He Jinchuan to create. However, He Jinchuan and Simu still do not have enough understanding of the cultivation world. To be able to manufacture magical tools in the field, at least they must be priceless sacred items. After waking up, He Jinchuan underwent a physical examination and his injuries healed, consolidating his cultivation. He transformed back into the appearance of his outer disciple Li Xian, picked up the crescent moon sword from the ground and hung it around his waist, then continued forward holding the still-awake white fox. The standard for the trial meeting is mainly based on the number of spiritual cores obtained by killing spirit beasts. Simu slept for over an hour in a slight jolt before waking up. Watching the villain's refreshing appearance, the fox's mood also improved, with its furry tail swaying left and right behind. After leaving that eerie forest, the surrounding spiritual energy surrounded and everything became normal. As it was getting dark, He Jinchuan and his white fox searched for a cave and were about to rest when the surrounding earth began to shake without warning. Trees 100 meters away broke and approached towards this direction. Immediately after, 7 or 8 disheveled white-clad disciples ran out of the forest. The disciples running ahead saw He Jinchuan panicking and shouting, "Run! The 5th-level spirit beast is chasing us." Seeking support, everyone be more active, so that I know I am not a single person, although I am a single person, seeking a monthly pass. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Close the door and release the villain. 8. The Son of Fate. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Close the door and release the villain. 8. The Son of Fate, the 5th level lower level spirit beast, can defeat 2 foundation building period cultivators and catch up with several fleeing young disciples in the blink of an eye. The spirit beast kicked its hind legs and leaped upwards, flying over the heads of Lingyun's sect disciples and stopping them. Behind are cracked ground and fallen trees, and ahead are towering beasts several meters high. The monster was snow-white all over, covered in white fur, and had a pair of deer horns on its head, resembling a tiger rather than a tiger, like a deer not a deer. This is a common demon beast in the cultivation world, Bai Qi, with a hot and irritable temperament. Bai Qi blocked the way, opened his mouth and let out a loud roar. His teeth were full of decaying flesh, and a foul odor wafted out of his mouth. The disciples of Lingyun's sect were a bit scared but didn't lose their composure. The skinny white-clad disciple tilted his head slightly, but his gaze didn't shift from Bai Qi. He asked another disciple beside him, "Brother Su, what should we do now?" The disciple who was called Brother Su had blood on his robe, his face turned white, and his breathing was unstable, as if he had been injured. He calmly pinched the magic formula and answered questions from his fellow disciples. "We snatched its ghost Duhua, and this spirit beast will definitely not let us leave. Since we can't leave, let's fight to the death and kill it." Gui Duhua is a medium to low-grade spiritual herb that governs ghosts and various spirits, and can treat goo and poison to eliminate evil and filthy qi. The disciple surnamed Su completed the sealing of the spell in his hand, and immediately a white wolf appeared beside him. The white wolf glanced at its owner and rushed towards Bai Qi. Others couldn't match the cultivation of disciples surnamed Su, so they took out their own swords and formed an array according to the external teachings. Soon, a simple trapped spirit array enveloped Bai Qi. Compared to Bai Qi, the white wolf is too petite, but it is agile in its movements. It dodges left and right under Bai Qi's body, occasionally taking a bite. Even if it does not cause substantial damage to Bai Qi, it is still enough for Bai Qi to be irritable. After chasing the white wolf for a few laps, Bai Qi understood that the enemy was trying to consume it. It let out a long howl as it looked up to the sky, and its spiritual pressure shattered the trapped spiritual formation. With its deer antlers lowered, it quickly and fiercely pushed the white wolf away. The white wolf let out a growl, and after landing, it convulsed uncontrollably, unable to get up. The disciple surnamed Su looked at his spiritual beast with heartache, grabbed his sword and leapt onto the back of Bai Qi, chopping it towards its head. Bai Qi looked at the soft fur and was not a scaly monster. The knife that he had swung down couldn't shake it, just like chopping on a hard rock. The remaining disciples rushed forward. Even if they couldn't harm Bai Qi, they could distract it and buy time for Su's disciple. These disciples are obviously led by disciples surnamed Su. He Jinchuan took off the crescent moon sword from his waist and joined the chaotic situation. Before charging forward, he repeatedly pressed the white fox into his clothes in his chest, making sure it wouldn't fall out, and then calmly took action. Simu exposed a furry head at the collar of the white robe, and looked up at the villain with a disgruntled glance. Dog, almost flattened her face. The disciple surnamed Su is on the back of Bai Qi, while he Jinchuan is grabbing Bai Qi's hair and scraping it under its body. Generally speaking, whether it is a spirit beast, a demon beast, or a demon beast, the most easily breached areas on its body are its abdomen and eyes. He Jinchuan fixed his eyes, pinched his sword finger and waved it. The crescent moon sword obediently landed on Bai Qi's belly. The belly of the spirit beast was intact, and he Jinchuan watched the changes several times. He continued to control the attack of the crescent blade, but each time he attacked, he switched to a different position. The dead hole is a taboo for both humans and animals. Bai Qi sensed the intentions of the human race, blushed his eyes, and completely fell into a state of madness. With a flick of its front paw, it scratched towards its belly, and with a palm, it knocked He Jinchuan away. The sudden frenzy of Bai Qi made the disciples of Lingyun's sect realize that the opponent's weakness was in their abdomen. They immediately turned to the human figure still struggling on the back of the spirit beast and said, "Senior Brother Su, attack its lower body." "Okay." Su, a disciple, responded in a loud voice, grabbing the white fur of the spirit beast and swinging it downwards. The sword in his hand thrust towards his belly. A few times later, he really found a loophole. At the position where Bai Qi was close to his heart, the animal's skin was cut open by the blade and spilled blood. The painful and stimulating Bai Qi rolled on the ground, and the breath of death made it lose its composure. Its eyes were filled with hatred towards the human cultivator. These cultivators not only take its ghost flower, but also want its life. The fifth level lower level spirit beast has some spiritual intelligence, and it is not willing to die in vain. Its spiritual power is fully aroused and it wants to die together with the surrounding cultivators. The disciple surnamed Su sensed Bai Qi's intention and infused all his spiritual energy into the sword, piercing heavily into the skin and flesh of the spirit beast, breaking open his chest and pulling out his spiritual core. The terrifying spiritual smoke condensed from Bai Qi dissipated into the clouds, and the huge beast fell to the ground without any breath. The disciple jumped off the belly of the spirit beast and skillfully put the spiritual core into his Qiankuan bag. He turned back to look at Bai Qi's body with satisfaction and said, "Great, get a 5th level spiritual core. Congratulations to Brother Su, Brother Su is really amazing." The other disciples with the surname Su relaxed their tense nerves and wore a smile of surviving the disaster on their faces. Simu hung his head on the collar of the villain, looking at the Su surname disciple's displeasure in his eyes without any concealment. This spirit core was clearly obtained by everyone together, and the weakness of the spirit beast was also discovered by the villain first. This Su person was completely polite and directly received it in his own bag. It's not just Simu Ihu who thinks this way. Among those disciples, the skinny little one at the beginning intentionally or unintentionally glanced at the Qiankuan bag on the waist of the Su surname disciple. However, the cultivation world's strength is respected, and dissatisfaction cannot be revealed. They still rely on the protection of the Su surname. After briefly asking several junior brothers and sisters with the surname Su if they were injured, he looked at He Jinchuan standing on the side. He walked confidently to He Jinchuan and made a fork in his hand salute, saying, "Thank you very much for your help just now, junior brother. I'm really sorry for the inconvenience caused to junior brother. My name is Su Ruoqing, and I don't know what junior brother's name is. If you don't mind, let's form a team together, right? Just call me junior brother when you come up, it's not certain who's older than me." After appraisal, Simu confirmed that the boy surnamed Su was a hypocrite without intention. "Wait." The black eyes of the white fox widened slightly, staring wide and round. "Su Ruoqing. Isn't this the male lead's name? Is this the male lead? How could this thing be more annoying than the villain looking at?" But upon closer inspection, the figure surnamed Suzy is well proportioned, with sword eyebrows and starry eyes, clear contours, a high and straight nose bridge, and an imposing aura. It is indeed a face that the male lead deserves. The little fox suddenly thought of the ugly, skinned face of the villain he had seen for the first time. This treatment, TSK, the villain must have offended the dog author who created this world. The small world that Simu shuttled through was originally a novel, but due to the existence of the power of speech, the novel world became a parallel world-like field. In order to maintain the stability of the parallel world, there was a Time and Space Management Bureau. It is said to be a world of novels, but these worlds do exist. It is said that the real world is different from the real world, belonging to countless different worlds closely connected to the real world. I, Li Xian, have met Senior Brother Su. He Jinchuan nodded slightly with a humble attitude. Su Ruoqing had a good impression of this junior brother and nodded, patting He Jinchuan's shoulder. Let's go, let's keep moving forward, he said. Okay. I don't mind if new disciples join midway. The spirit beast is too big to take away, everyone just cut some of the spirit beast's flesh and let it go. The only female disciple among the few noticed the white fox in He Jinchuan's arms early on. As they approached her, they couldn't hide their admiration and asked, "Junior brother, you fox is so cute. Can you give me a hug? Women have always liked furry things." He Jinchuan turned his gaze towards the female disciple and refused with a hint of shyness and apology, "Senior sister, Xiao Bai is afraid of strangers." "Ah, okay." The female disciple pursed her lips regretfully. She didn't feel afraid of the white fox staring at her, and if the master didn't want her, she could only give up. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Close the door and release the opponents. 9. Bailu Snake Cave, Part 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Close the door and release the opponents. 9. Bailu Snake Cave, Part 1. The fairy secret realm, the deeper the spiritual energy, the more dangerous it becomes. As soon as the forest passed, there was a lush green grassland in front of us. However, when the first disciple stepped onto the grassland, only then did everyone know that there was a swamp under their feet. Everyone watched helplessly as the disciples' feet sank into the mud, reached out their hands, and before they could reach the disciple, he was suddenly pulled into the soil by something, and warm blood splattered on the faces of those around him. The fear of the unknown is the most terrifying. What's going on? The person walking at the forefront instinctively wanted to step back, but as soon as their retreating foot landed, it sank deeply into the mud half a foot. What should I do? I don't want to die. Senior brother Su, come up with a solution. As a practitioner, seeking the Tao and seeking immortality, the path of immortality is unpredictable. Although one knows from the beginning of practice, no one is afraid to retreat when facing death. There is something unusual under this swamp, otherwise that disciple wouldn't have had an accident just now. Su Ruoqing's forehead was sweating and his heart was beating, forcing him to calm down. He glared at the disciple who shouted the loudest and gritted his teeth, scolding, "Quiet. There's something down there, I can't judge you so loudly." Although Su Ruoqing had tried his best to control himself, his voice still trembled. Fortunately, the disciple quickly quieted down and stared directly at Su Ruoqing, as if he would abandon him if he didn't look at her. Su Ruoqing took a few deep breaths and took out a piece of yellow paper from his sleeve. The yellow paper was cut into shape and his facial features were painted. Puppet paper. The only female disciple recognized the purpose of the talisman paper. "Brother Su, how did you have this thing?" "I bought it at the foot of the mountain before attending the apprenticeship ceremony last year," Su Ruoqing explained slightly and then began reciting the mnemonic. The yellow paper shook in his hand and then floated lightly to the ground, immediately becoming the size of an adult upon landing. The puppet paper looked at the thin piece of paper with weight, and under Su Ruoqing's control, it walked step by step towards the opposite side of the swamp, leaving deep footprints on the ground. Staring at the puppet paper, everyone's hearts were raised in their throats, until the puppet paper walked out of the grassy swamp and stopped on the opposite boulder, before everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Su Ruoqing let go of the trick he was pinching with his fingertips, and the puppet paper on the stone immediately burned. The puppet paper was scrapped, and he spoke in a deep voice, "Everyone walks forward on the footprints of the puppet paper." Led by Su Ruoqing, the remaining people followed closely. He Jinchuan didn't move. He squatted down slowly, put his hands on the ground, and then mobilized the magic gas disguised as Reiki to probe into the swamp, concentrating on feeling the situation below. Any self-righteous action without understanding the enemy's motives and strength is self-seeking. He Jinchuan vaguely felt that there was something with tentacles like an octopus under the swamp, which was a third-order spiritual beast. The puppet paper used to launch attacks, but while Su Ruoqing probed it, it was also waiting for the rabbit. He Jinchuan withdrew his hand and stood up to the disciples who had already walked a few meters ahead, saying, "Stop everyone. There is a third-level spirit beast under the swamp. When you move forward a little, it will launch an attack. The further you move forward, the softer the mud becomes, and the attack of the spirit beast becomes unavoidable." "What spirit beast is it?" Su Ruoqing turned back. "There are many tentacles, I don't know what they are. If you don't believe yourself, probe your spiritual energy into the swamp. It is the first time I have heard of using spiritual energy to explore the path, but the beginner is to feel spiritual energy, and spiritual energy can sense all things." Upon hearing this, Lingyun sect disciples bent down and covered their hands on the surface of the soil. When the disciples of Lingyun's sect withdrew their hands, their faces looked somewhat unsightly. However, knowing what they were facing, the fear on their faces dissipated and became serious. "Lead it out," Su Ruoqing drew his sword from his waist. "Since you already know what it is, there is no need for the other party to ambush in the dark. The highest cultivators here are me, senior brother Qingli, and senior brother Su. The three of us are going to lead out the spirit beast. Please be careful of your own safety." The female disciple Ame frowned and held the long whip in her hand. "Okay." The skinny disciple who had some grudges towards Su Ruoqing before took a step forward, and he was Qingli. 3 disciples took out their weapons, with their spiritual energy running under their feet and wrapping their magical tools. They stepped on the thick ground and rushed towards a swamp, while the remaining disciples nervously watched as it changed. With a wave of Su Ruoqing's sword, it splashed on the mud in the swamp, and the sword energy and spiritual energy passed through the mud and landed on the spirit beast below. The attack, isolated by the mud, was like scratching a boot and had no effect on the spirit beast. Spiritual beasts with low cultivation are easily angered and irritable. When the attacks of female disciples and Qingli come one after another, they immediately provoke the dissatisfaction of the spiritual beast. Water blue tentacles extend from under the mud, and the surface of the tentacles is covered with exquisite spiritual shards that sparkle, giving off a taste of mud without staining. The tentacles that crawled out of the swamp were thrown high and then dropped to the ground, causing the soft soil beneath the mud to shake. Some disciples were unprepared and stumbled, with half of their bodies embedded in the swamp. "Ah ah ah! Help me! Help me!" The disciples coincidentally thought of their first fellow disciple who died tragically. "Don't move around, otherwise you'll sink deeper and deeper. Help me! Help me! Who will help me?" At this moment, although the disciples struggled to calm down and stop struggling in the mud, the rebellious spirit beasts beneath the mud caused the soft soil to float, and several disciples were still visible to the naked eye being engulfed by the swamp. Waiting is death. Someone reacted and thought of the footprints left by the puppet paper before, quickly stepping on those footprints and fleeing towards the boulder. He Jinchuan has been following these people at the back all along, and it is not very realistic to go to the boulder together. He clenched his crescent sword in both hands, jumped away after his tentacles attacked, and did not forget to attack the spirit beast. The blade of the crescent moon knife is sharper than the imagined center, brushing past the tentacles without any resistance, just like the newly opened blade cutting tofu with ease. But this knife directly caused the monster under the swamp to rush out of the mud, and a huge thing jumped up, blocking the sun and casting shadows. It was only then that he Jinchuan could see clearly where the big octopus was, which was a meatball entwined by many snakes with thick arms. After the thing fell to the ground, it was scattered, and hundreds of pale blue snakes were wriggling rapidly in all directions, acting like lightning. Upon seeing these snakes howling, Simu quickly buried his head in the villain's clothes, leaving only one tail hanging outside, and his fox fur exploding and trembling. The crescent moon knife spun in He Jinchuan's hand, threw it out, and cut off the head of a small snake rushing towards him from the side. Then, He tilted his body back at a 45-degree angle to avoid the snake biting in front of him. The snake almost brushed against He Jinchuan's nose bridge and flew by. Simu's little paws grabbed the villain's clothes and buried them in his arms. She couldn't see what was happening outside, but she swayed around. Nima, it's as thrilling as doing a roller coaster. The disciple on the boulder was also attacked by a group of snakes, and the disciple who couldn't dodge and was bitten fell to the ground and foamed at the mouth. These are all venomous snakes. The 4 people who were still in the swamp took 1 life with 1 move, but these venomous snakes killed one and crawled out more from below the swamp, killing more and more. The disciple who fell on the boulder, with blood dripping from the wound bitten by a snake, disappeared from sight after a moment. I gave up. Someone crushed the teleportation symbol in despair and immediately disappeared into the secret realm. In less than half an hour, apart from the person who couldn't get up, only He Jinchuan and the other 4 were still struggling. Suddenly, the female disciple exclaimed in terror, "Brother Su, be careful. I saw a venomous snake climbing onto Su Ruoqing's back, biting into his main artery." End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Close the door and release the villain. 10. Bailu Snake Cave, Middle. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Close the door and release the villain. 10. Bailu Snake Cave, Middle. The only disciple among the dozen with the surname Su is Su Ruoqing. Upon hearing the sound of Senior Brother Su, Simu slightly tilted his head and revealed an eye from the villain's collar. He saw a small water-blue snake biting tightly onto Su Ruoqing's erect neck. The female disciple on the side quickly stepped forward and grabbed the small snake 7 inches, trying to get it off Su Ruoqing's neck. However, the small snake remained motionless. In the end, Su Ruoqing's sword turned and cut the small snake off its waist, but the small snake still refused to let go. The snake venom flowed into Su Ruoqing's body along his pulse. His face gradually turned green, his lips turned black, and his body was drained. He fell straight to the ground, surrounded by more venomous snakes, and in an instant, he wrapped around Su Ruoqing. After the water-blue snake dispersed, Su Ruoqing's figure disappeared from the ground, leaving only a pool of blood. Did the male lead die like this? Was it eaten by a third-order spirit beast? Simu's mind is foggy. Su Ruoqing disappeared and the target of the venomous snake's attack was only 3 people left, the female disciple and Qingli. Their cultivation was not as good as Su Ruoqing's, and they were bitten by the venomous snake in just a few breaths, surrounded and devoured by the snake pack like Su Ruoqing. Compared to the 3 of them, He Jinchuan was not much better either. He took a bite on his left calf, and in an instant, his right foot withdrew its strength and half knelt on the ground. If you want to escape, you can't escape. He Jinchuan bent down and tightly protected Simu. From Simu's perspective, there were crawling venomous snakes all around, intertwined with each other, and their water-blue scales rubbed against each other. Apart from the snake body and the snake heads biting on the villain's body, she couldn't see any outside scenery. A slightly thicker venomous snake squeezed in from outside, spitting out a message and spotted a little fox hidden in the arms of the human cultivator. It opened its 2 fists-wide mouths and exposed its fangs to attack. Simu was so scared that he forgot to react for a moment. As the big snake was about to bite the fox's head, He Jinchuan, who was holding Simu, twisted his wrist. His big hand, full of venomous snake teeth, grabbed the snake's neck and pulled it to death, making it unable to move. Snake venom causes chaos in the brain and gradually leads to loss of consciousness. The little fox hid in its arms and dared not move. The venomous snakes around had not yet left, and the villain's body was gradually becoming cold. After an unknown amount of time, Simu felt himself and the villain sinking, surrounded by mud. By the time the sense of descent was over, the venomous snakes around had already left at some point. Simu tentatively arched in the arms of the villain, revealing his eyes and looking outward. Surrounded by stone walls and with passages on both sides, it is a cave. The cave was silent, and Simu saw other disciples of Lingyun's sect who were supposed to be eaten by venomous snakes in the distance. Confirming that there was no danger, Simu quickly crawled out of He Jinchuan's arms. She turned around to look at He Jinchuan and reached out her small paw to push and push. Like the people around him, He Jinchuan's clothes were in tattered condition, with the skin and flesh exposed on the outside covered in bite marks left by venomous snakes, and the skin and flesh in each tooth hole swelled and turned purple. Suddenly, Simu had a clever idea and quickly ran to Su Ruoqing's side, pulling down the Qiankuan bag from his waist and reaching out his paws to search inside. Soon, the white fox pulled out a spiritual grass from the Qiankuan bag, with purple flowers blooming on it. Simu pulled out one of the small flowers, hesitated for a moment, and was afraid of not enough. He then pulled down 3 more flowers and ran towards the villain. The fox claw held the small flower and handed it to He Jinchuan's mouth, then rudely attacked inside, afraid that the other party wouldn't be able to swallow the small fox claw and it would hit someone else's throat. The medicinal effect of Gui Du Hua was rapid. After 3 breaths, He Jinchuan regained consciousness and opened his eyes. He quickly pulled out his fox paw from his mouth, propping it up on the ground to vomit. There was an uncomfortable feeling of hair stuck in his throat. Seeing He Jinchuan wake up, the little fox excitedly wags its tail and extends its tongue to please lick He Jinchuan's chin. Great! The villain is still alive. After calming down, He Jinchuan began to examine his situation. He gently touched the head of the white fox, got up, and walked towards Su Ruoqing. He picked up a ghost flower from the ground and pulled it off. His fingertips pointed at 2 of Su Ruoqing's acupoints, and he put the flower into Su Ruoqing's mouth. The other person automatically swallowed it. Simu closely followed He Jinchuan's feet, as if afraid he would run away. The disciples of Lingyun's sect woke up one after another. Su Ruoqing reached out and rubbed his erect neck, looking at He Jinchuan with his back to him. Junior brotherly Xian, where are we? After detoxifying the last disciple, He Jinchuan turned to Su Ruoqing and returned the unused ghost duhua to him. It should be the nest of those venomous snakes. Seeing that Su Ruoqing, the ghost governor flower in He Jinchuan's hand, froze for a moment and quickly recovered as usual, he took the ghost governor flower and picked up the Qiankuan bag to put it away. He stood up and patted the dust off his body, saying, "We can also be considered to have survived a great disaster. Senior brother Su, let's go first." The first thing many disciples do when they wake up is to take out the teleportation talisman and give up the trial. The wide cave instantly lost half of its people. This is snake fruit. Qingli's first thing after waking up was to look at the cave. The stone walls of the cave were covered with blue fruits, and he picked one and crushed it. The crushed fruit flowed a light blue liquid. The snake fruit is crystal clear and exceptionally beautiful. Simu curiously ran over and picked one, holding it in his hand and spinning it a few times. The fruit had a fragrant and sweet taste, like a 21st century candy. The white fox stared at the snake fruit for a moment and opened its mouth. The snake fruit was taken before it even reached its mouth, and the little fox bit it empty. The whole fox was also picked up by someone. Blue snake fruit, lethargic snake venom, ice blue snake scales, and dark golden snake pupils. The female disciple immediately remembered the identities of these venomous snakes and said, "It seems that we have encountered the 100-carp snake. A 100-year-old snake, born in groups, with a body full of blue water and golden eyes. It was originally a snake and has been cultivating its fins for 100 years. It prefers damp and dark places. Not only that, we also fell into the snake cave," Su Ruoqing answered, taking out a night pearl from his Qiankuan bag for lighting. "Don't delay any longer, quickly find an exit. Let's use fire instead." Qingli took out a torch and lit it. "Go against the wind." Su Ruoqing did not retract the night pearl, nor did he oppose Qingli's words. Qingli walked at the forefront, followed closely by the female disciple. He Jinchuan, with his little white fox, habitually walked at the back. The location where everyone wakes up is relatively wide, and the passage is getting narrower and narrower as they walk forward. At the back, one person will be able to pass through. From time to time, several hundred days snakes can be encountered in the cave, all of which are killed by Qingli walking at the front or He Jinchuan walking behind. The passage seemed to have no end, and the surrounding stone walls became increasingly damp, from initially dry to later covered with water droplets and moss, and even flowing water. A fishy smell also appeared in the passage, and as they walked forward, the disciples of Lingyun's sect became more uneasy. However, the gentle breeze blowing in the air indicated that the exit was right ahead. Following the passage for about half an hour, the passage began to become spacious until 4 or 5 people could stand side by side. A bright light also appeared ahead, and the disciples' eyes lit up and they quickened their steps. At this moment, Qingli, the leader, suddenly stopped and everyone stopped. In front of me is a deep and bottomless clear pond, with blue and white clouds overhead and stone walls on all sides. The pond water is clear but cannot be seen to the end, the only way out is above the clear pond. "How do we get up there?" said the female disciple. "Is it safe underwater?" As the female disciple spoke, ripples rose in circles on the clear pond, transforming into waves, and a shadow deepened underwater. Wow! A 3-person thick 100-days snake rushed out of the water, its huge figure blocking the light on the clear pond. End of this chapter.